Hey, what's up? David Wood here for theblendmode.com, and welcome to another awesome GIMP tutorial. In today's tutorial, we are going to be reviewing an old tutorial of mine from 2009, which is how to use the Gimp Flame plugin. And if I switch to my desktop here, this tutorial came out in 2009, so 13 years ago now. It's definitely a little outdated, and the quality for this recording is pretty bad. It was recorded on the family desktop with a really poor mic, and it needs some TLC. So, after 13 long years of waiting, we're going to recreate this tutorial. I'm going to be going a little more in-depth in what the Flame plugin can do, and hopefully you guys will find this useful. And the Flame plugin is a really fun plugin to use. It's got all kinds of features and all kinds of possibilities. And you might be asking, what exactly is the Flame plugin, in case you aren't aware of it? Well, we have to do a little bit of history on this, because the original Flame plugin, or I guess it wasn't even a plugin at the time, the original Flame algorithm, the code for it, came out in 1992, which is the same year that I was born, so it's almost 30 years old, like I am. And it is a really, really cool code that basically generates images based on mathematical equations and algorithms. This is flame.com, and you can see here that it's spelled FLAM3.com. And this is talking about the original source code for it, and there's a really cool video that goes into some of the history behind it. But basically, this code has been around for a really long time. And it has since been modified and updated, and it has been used in all kinds of things. And the Flame plugin provides you with all kinds of possibilities. It's super cool. But it is a little bit tricky to use, and there's not a whole lot of information about how to use it. So I'm going to cover some of that. Just real quick, though, I would definitely recommend checking out the flame.com homepage here and watching this video. It's very informative about some of the accomplishments of what this plugin has been used in before in professional media. It's very, very cool. And if you want to look in the code, it gives you the link to the GitHub for it and stuff. And there's galleries and all kinds of things. And it has even spawned several other programs as well. We see down here that there's one called Frost, there's Apotheosis, there is Quasmic or Oxidizer, J Wildfire. There's all kinds of different programs that have all taken the algorithm code for creating these images and made it into their own unique programs that you can download and try. Just as a quick example here, I mean, even if I just go to DeviantArt and looking at fractal images like this, and like that looks super cool. Somebody spent some time using different colors here. You know, we got some nice cyans and blues and pinks and purples. And this is just one example. I can click over here on these different stock examples and go to other ones that people have come up with. There's all kinds of different ways of using this plugin. And some of these effects are a little more advanced than what I'm going to cover. Definitely more advanced. This is just to give you kind of a rough overview of how the Flame plugin works and how you can use it to make a pretty cool background for yourself. So let's go ahead and get into GIMP for this. And this is one of the results that I came up with. And it's kind of similar to my original tutorial. We've got this basic kind of swirly fractal flame effect going on. There's a lens flare in here. Really basic stuff that I did in this tutorial. And so this is just with a little bit of playing around. I added some stars in the background, some kind of cosmic like nebula clouds in the background, some volumetric lens flares, a regular lens flare, and a little bit of a starburst. Hopefully you can see these okay. It's a little bit hard to see if you're watching this on a compressed YouTube video. And if I can zoom in here and you can see some of these stars in the background and stuff. But it's going to be pretty cool. I'm not going to go crazy like what I did here. This is just as an example to show you what you can do with this. We're going to keep it a little bit simpler than that. But anyway, so let's just jump into this real quick. So I'm going to make a new image. And most of you probably have an HD monitor at home, so we're just going to make a 1920 by 1080 pixel image, and we'll hit OK. If you don't have a black background already, go ahead and fill that in with black. And once you have that, you go to Filters, Render, Fractals, Flame. And that will open the Flame plugin. It doesn't have a larger preview window, so that can be kind of annoying when you're trying to decide if the flame that you're using looks good or anything. But just a real quick kind of overview of this. In here we've got the rendering. We can change the brightness of the rendered image. There's a contrast. There's a gamma feature. The gamma kind of affects the alpha channel of the image. We're going to get into the sample density, the spatial oversample, and the spatial filter radius in a second. I'm not going to touch those yet. And then there's also a color map. So there are several built-in palettes that you can choose from that will give you a little tiny preview of kind of what the colors in that palette are. And you can just cycle through these with your mouse scroll wheel. There is an option to pick a existing image that's open in Gimp, one of the layers, and use that as the color profile. And then you can also use a custom gradient. So if you have a gradient selected, if you come over to the gradients and pick one of those, let's say we do like full saturation, and go back to this, switch it kind of like that, and there you can see that gets applied to it. So if I just hit OK on this, and we wait for this to render out, and this plugin can take a while to actually render the flame fractal that we generated, because it is basing it all off of mathematical equations, and it has to have time to compute. So here's an example of a fractal with using the full saturation spectrum gradient, going all the way from, you know, red to orange to yellow to green to blue to purple back to red. And it comes out with this kind of, I don't even know what this is, this really wonky, messy color here. So that's kind of the basics of what that does. There's also a camera option, so you can change how close you are to this fractal. You can move it to the left and move it to the right, move it up and down. So we're just going to kind of leave these as they are, put that back at 0. Then we're going to go into the Edit menu. So this is where the true power of the Flame plugin lies. And again, we're looking at little tiny previews, so hopefully you can see these okay. In here we have 9 boxes here that each have a different variation of the flame that we're currently looking at. This center image right here is the currently selected flame. And the ones around it are all different variations. Now, every time you click on one of these little preview images, it will change the surrounding boxes. So right now, this one in the middle, each time I click on it, it's keeping that flame selected, but it's giving me 8 new variations. So it's always randomized. So as I click this, you can see they all change around here. And I'm going to set this gradient real quick back onto something with a better color. Hopefully that we can see better than the rainbow going on. And as we click through that, those will all change. And there's a couple different options in here. We can hit randomize, and that will completely randomize everything we have. So we'll lose the original flame. And this is something to be careful of, is that once you lose that original one, there's no way of getting it back. So you don't want to accidentally click on one of these surrounding ones until you're sure you're not going to use this one that you're generating. Which, if you're trying to make multiple copies of the same flame on different layers, like I actually had to do this as an example, which I'll show you in a second. You just want to make sure that you don't accidentally click on that and change the flame you're using if you're trying to make comparisons. So there's an option in here called speed, and as we move this, it changes some of the shape of the fractal itself. So basically, if I set this down to 0.05, all 8 of these variations are going to be very, very similar to the original flame that we have. But if I turn this up, then the variations become much more randomized. So we're just going to kind of leave that in the middle where it was. We have a variation type down here, and this is pretty cool. This is basically presets that control the overall shape of the fractal. So right now it's on same, so that ideally they'll all come out similar to the currently selected one. There's a random option, which will randomize everything. Then there's linear, there's spherical, there's a swirl, there's a diamond, there's all kinds of shapes. It's way easier if you just go ahead and play with them than if I try to sit here and explain every single one to you. They're all pretty fun. They're all pretty cool. They all can create some pretty interesting results. So I'm going to just go through here, and I'm going to pick one of these that I like the look of. I'm going to go with, let's see, how about, I like spherical. And spherical, this is actually the same one that I used in the original tutorial. Like, spherical just has a really nice look to it. It leaves you with some nice swirly fractal elements, some kind of these very thin kind of hair-like wisps that I really like the look of. And that's what I'm going to use in this tutorial as well. So I'm going to hit spherical, and then I'm just going to hit randomize a couple times until I find something that I hope looks good. It's really hard to see because it's so small. So we'll just go with, let's see, how about this one right there. So I'm going to click on it, and you see it moves it to the center box, so that's now my selected one, and I'm just going to hit OK. And then there's another preview. And then if I hit OK, it'll render it out real quick. And there's the result. And it looks pretty cool. So that's the basics of how the Flame plugin works. But let's actually go into the settings a little bit more. In the Flame options, we have a sample density, a spatial oversample, and this spatial filter radius. And there's almost next to no documentation on these settings and what they actually do. In fact, even if I go and look at the official Gimp 2.10 help documents, and you see the flame thing in here, it doesn't have any information on this stuff. It tells you right here that the plugin is currently not being maintained, and that it will sometimes crash if you use an image that's too big. It says right here, so the plugin was given to Gimp by Scott Draves, who is the original coder of the Flame algorithm, in 1997, which is how I found links to his other pages and stuff. And even his page here that for using it, and even in here, he doesn't explain what these settings really do. The only one he touches on is the sample density, which I'll get to in a second. So I had to go through and actually experiment with this all on my own. Actually, if you come down into the official documentation for Gimp, and you come down here to the rendering, and it tells you what these things are. This is great. I love this. So spatial density, it has an explanation of what that does, but then the oversample, it says, what does this do? And the spatial filter says, what does this do? So I'm not the only one that didn't really know what was going on. So I spent a little while playing with these settings, taking the sliders and moving them back and forth on several example images using the same flame fractal type each time. And I more or less have an idea of what these things actually do. So I'll get into those. And I have an example here. So this is my completed image, but this is the base image right here. And you can see I've put text on the screen here telling you what the settings do, or what the sliders are set to. And I'll explain that right now. So the sample density is the only one that has any documentation, the only one that it says what it actually does. And the sample density is basically the quality of the render. So the higher the quality, the higher the density, basically. And if you have the density too low, the image comes out very noisy, very grainy. And it doesn't look very good in most cases. So we don't really have to touch this. We can change this, we can increase this, but it also does some kind of wonky things with the actual fractal, which I'll get into in a second. So this one right here, so the sample density is 5. And if I turn on this next one, so in this case, I took the density, so the actual render quality, and I increased it from 5 to 15. And you can see that it definitely darkened this image up compared to the original here. a lot of the highlights in here are now suddenly dulled and gray. And I'm not sure what the exact correlation is between the density and the actual outcome of the basically the pixel's value. But if you increase the density, your image is going to come out like this. It's going to come out darker. In my next example here, now what does the oversample do? If I take this and I turn it on, suddenly you can see that some of these areas that prior to that were kind of gray and dull, suddenly it's very focused. Suddenly it has a nice highlight here, where before it was just kind of a gray mess. So this is where the oversample comes in handy, because you can take the oversample, and here's an example of it turned down. So it went from 2 to 1, and you can see now it really is just a gray mess. Like all of the color and everything, all of the contrast is pretty much gone. That's kind of all that it does, is it basically takes any areas where it should have a highlight and basically adds it back in when you increase the oversample slider. Let's see. If I turn on the second one here, you can see the image suddenly ended up blurry. And you can see that the radius went from 0.75 to 4. And the way that I understand this to work, the spatial radius controls the size of the particles that make up the actual flame render. And I hope this is correct. This is the best understanding that I can get to. So basically, the smaller the particle, the finer the image is going to be, and the clearer the flame is going to come out, basically. So if I take the slider and I turn it up, I'm increasing the size of those particles. So instead of being smaller, instead they get blown up. And when they're blown up, in my head anyway, if they were a perfect square, and you took that perfect square pixel and you expanded it out, it's going to end up being blurry, because that's how things work. You know, things with sharp edges, as you scale them up, those edges no longer stay sharp. As you scale it up, you lose pixel depth, basically. And that's how I understand this filter, or this slider to work. Again, this is all just me assuming that this is how this works, and it's the only thing that makes sense in my mind. So basically, if you take that filter radius and you turn it up, you're increasing the size of those particles, which end up becoming blurry. And then as they combine in the image as a whole, you end up with this blurry mess that looks like it's out of focus. And again, I'm not sure if that's exactly correct, but it seems to be the case. So we don't want to turn this up. By default, it's set at 0.75. I actually, for some of these examples, I actually turned it down to like 0.5, just to try to make it a little bit sharper than it was. So that's how I understand the radius slider to work. So that's how I understand these different pieces to work. So the sample density, again, controls the overall quality of the render, and the higher the density, the better the quality, but also the darker the palette that it uses comes out, and the more muddied the colors are. The spatial oversample is a way of kind of removing that muddied effect. So the higher that is, the better the contrast, the better the colors of the palette come out, the better the highlights of the flame that you use are. And the filter radius is basically controlling the particle size of the flame itself, and a higher value will make those particles become blurry as they enlarge, and you'll end up with something that looks out of focus. There's one more thing that's a little bit weird about this color map that I'm not sure how to explain, but I'm just going to show you real quick. And if I just use the flame on this one, and I'm going to use one of these other colors. So I'm going to use this Ernst Anti-Pope one, which I think looks pretty cool. And let's see, I'm just going to kind of zoom in a little bit. Pick one of these other flame renders, something with a little bit more of a cloud to it, I guess. Let's try this one. And you can see, like, as I change the color map, that they change as a whole. And right now my settings are for the density, the oversample, and the radius. They're just at the default, basically. So 5, 2, and they should be 0.75. And if I just hit OK and I wait for that to render out, and again, depending on how large this is and what your density is, these can be pretty long to wait for. But there it is. So these colors came out really cool, and you can see that some of these are kind of a purple, some of these are more of like a reddish pink, some of these came out with like a goldish yellow. I don't know what drives those colors. I don't know how it decides what to put where. I think it's all probably somewhere in the code. But just be aware of that when you're doing this, that you might not always get the color combination that you want out of it. But anyway, so let's go back to the other image where we were going to make a flame. Let's re-show the flame plugin. I actually really like the one that I just came out with. I think that came out really good. Except I'm going to change the color map. I actually really like using this first palette option, this Gris Josette, I don't even know. Well, it's been 13 years since I made that original video, and I still don't know how this is supposed to be pronounced. But I like this one because it's not a purely monochrome, black and white palette. It actually has some blues and some silvers and kind of some cool grays in there. And I think it makes it look pretty cool. So we'll hit OK. We'll wait for that to render out. There we go. That looks pretty cool as it is. Oh, and before I forget, this is something else to note. Let me just, I'm going to make a new layer here real quick. And if you look over here in my layers, the background one, the new image that we created, this is in bold because it does not have an alpha channel. This new layer that I made, it's not in bold, so this does have an alpha channel. And that's important to note because when you go to create a flame, so I'm going to use the same one, I'm going to change the color map and hit OK. So we can see here that it's rendered it again, but now it doesn't have the black background. And that's not what we're going for. We want to have the black background. So I mean, I could come in here, I could make another black background. And you can see like right away, this immediately doesn't look right because it rendered out with the alpha channel. And a lot of these swirls end up kind of just gone. However, let's just merge that together. Let's make one more layer. I'm going to right click and remove the alpha channel. We're going to run the flame plugin again, just as it is, and hit OK. And this one will have the background, but it's going to have the other color palette that I chose. And that looks so much better. So this is what it should look like as long as you don't have an alpha channel compared to this, which came out way too dark. You're missing a ton of the different little swirl elements back in here where the alpha should be, and it just doesn't look good. And so here's a comparison. So that's with the one color palette. There's with the other color palette. And they both look really cool. I'm going to stick with the original one because I think the original one, I like these highlights better than what came out of this one. Although I do like this color scheme. It does look pretty cool. But in either case, I'm going to take this flame that I have here. And I mean, already, I don't even have to do anything to it. This is already a really cool background on its own. But we can make it look better. So as I said, this isn't a pure black and white. And I prefer that when I'm actually adding colors to this. So let's go ahead and colorize this and make it look better. So we're going to go to Colors, Curves. And Curves is a great plugin. I love using curves for adding color to things. It gives you so much control over it. In here, we're going to go to the red channel. And we've got to think about what color we want this to be. I'm going to do kind of a blue. I think blue looks really good. So in a blue case, we need to take the red channel and we need to drop it down. And you can see it kind of turns kind of a greenish blue. We'll go to the green channel. We're going to push this up a little bit in the highlights, just a little. And then we'll go to the blue channel and push that up in the midtones. And if I push this too far, you can see the image gets kind of grainy. We don't want to do that. We want to keep these colors a little more muted. We don't want it to be too overly saturated in this case. Something kind of like that should be good. If I go back to the green one, I'm going to re-add a contrast curve to this. So I'm pushing the green up in the highlights, so it'll come out more of a cyan blue. And I'm going to add a curve down here in the shadows and drop it the other way, so it comes out as a darker, more vibrant royal blue, I guess you could say. So something kind of like that. And if I go into the red, maybe I'll move the red up a little bit, maybe down a little bit, just until I'm kind of satisfied with how these colors came out. Something like that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to go to the value, and I'm just going to add a little bit of contrast to this. So right now there is some noise that you can see in here. I'm not too concerned about that. The noise just adds to the flavor of the image, but I am going to add a little bit of a contrast to this just to crush some of the noise that's in the black areas here. So something like that looks pretty good. And already, that looks pretty cool as it is. You could use that as a background without any complaints from anybody. But what else can we do? Let's take this layer, we'll duplicate it, and we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Why? Because we're going to add a glow to it. I mean, who doesn't like adding nice glows to different, you know, light sources and highlights? I like glows. They're fun. It's like playing with lightsabers or playing with starfields. It's a lot of fun. So we'll take this glow and we're just going to push the blur up a little bit. Nothing too crazy. Probably like 12 or 13 should work for this case. We'll set the blend mode of this to screen. And right now it's kind of like blowing out the whole image. So we need to adjust the contrast for this. So we'll just go into our curves. And we're just going to drop this down because we only want some of these brighter areas to have that glow. So if I just turn off the background layer, you can see what this did. So it just, basically all of this stuff around the edges, it got rid of the glow around there. And it's just keeping it around this center area. And it's also making this a much darker blue, which might work in our favor. We might have to colorize it to come out better, but we'll see. We're going to leave it like that. I'm going to bump the highlights up just a little bit, hit OK, turn that back on. And that looks pretty cool. I like that. It definitely helps make this feel much brighter than it was before compared to that. But it is a little bit too blue that we might have to fix. So we're just going to do another little Gaussian blur on top of this, just to kind of spread that out a little bit more again. And then just a real quick colorizing. We're just going to use the colors, hue, and saturation. And we're going to take the hue and we're just going to push that to the left a little bit, just to go from kind of that dark blue. We're going to bring out some of that cyan color instead. So something just a little bit like that. I think that looks pretty cool. So it goes from that to that. Overall, I really like the look of this. We can maybe make these highlights a little bit brighter. So we'll just take this layer, we're going to duplicate this, set it on, let's see, maybe dodge. That looks pretty good. And then we'll just go into our curves and just kind of darken that up until it's only affecting those highlight areas. And then we can turn that glow back on. There we go. I like that. That looks pretty cool. And already that looks really good. You can use that as a background if you want. Put it on DeviantArt or something like that. Let's make it even better though. We're going to take these layers. We'll go layer, new from visible. We're going to go and add a Gaussian blur to this. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. This one's pretty small, so like 4 pixels, 4 or 5. And then we're going to go to our colors, desaturate, desaturate. And we want to remove all the color from this for what we're going to do here. We can then choose the mode, and the idea is we want to try to just keep these highlights here. We want to get rid of as much of this other information as possible. So as we move through the different modes, we might find one that works better than others. I think in this case, Luma works the best in keeping these highlights, but getting rid of most of the background here. So once that's done, we'll go to colors, we'll go to our levels. And we're just going to take this gray slider and we're going to push this over until we're basically only left with these highlights. We'll push that over, and then we're going to take the white slider, push it to the left, and kind of boost those up a little bit. So something kind of like that should work. And we'll hit OK. And then we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And in here we want to uncheck the chain link between X and Y. And we want to take the X size and we want to move that up. And what we're doing is basically creating some fake anamorphic lens flares, some lens streaks, just to add a little bit of variety to this. So like that should be fine. We'll hit OK. And right now this is kind of a blurry mess, so we need to add some like definition between these lines. So we'll go to Filter, Enhance, Sharpen. And in here, if we take the radius and we push that up, you can see it actually gets rid of quite a few of these. And it creates a separation between some of these kind of grayish areas. So we'll just kind of push that up until it separates a little bit. We can play with the amount. So actually something, let's see. Something closer to that probably is what we want. Basically, the idea is just to make these streaks kind of individual again. And these are still probably more than they need to be. That's a lot of streaks for what we have here. But we can take this and we can crush the levels again. Just to try to keep just some of these here. That looks pretty good. We'll add some more blur to this, a little more Gaussian blur. Just a little bit, just to kind of soften those edges up again. And then we can set this on screen. And you can see that that did quite a bit, but now we just have to color it. So we'll go to curves, we'll go into the blue channel, bump that up, red channel, bring that down, green channel, bring that up a little bit. And there we go, we have some fake anamorphic lens flares on there, and it looks pretty good. And what else could we do to this? That's a good question. Let's make a new layer. We'll make this black. We'll set the blend mode on screen. We'll go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Supernova. And Supernova is a really fun plugin to use. It gives you this starburst effect. And you can move it around, you can change the color, you can change the radius. We're not going to go into depth on this. I'm pretty sure most of you guys know how to use this one. It's a pretty fun plugin to use. We're going to take this and we're going to lower the radius of this because we don't need it to be too bright. I'm just going to place this over this bright center right there. And again, it doesn't have to be anything too big. Once that's in there, I don't like all of these little rays of light. I don't like the spokes. So I always drop this number down. I think it looks better with something more random or something smaller. So like 25 should be pretty good. We can take this random hue and turn it up just a little bit. And if I set this to normal, you can see basically this just adds some random hues in there to the color that you currently have selected. And you can even hit random seed and it will change, and it will also change the random hue that you have. This is a little too blue, so we need to come in here, we just need to add some of the green, some of the cyan back into it. Something kind of like that. And again, hitting this button will change some of that randomness. Maybe turn this, let's see, maybe we can turn this down a little bit. The random hue is pretty powerful, so you shouldn't use anything that's too high. Like usually like between 3 and 6 is a pretty good number to use. I think that overall that looks pretty good. And we'll hit OK. And then set this blend mode back on screen so you can see what it does. And I think overall it looks pretty cool. We can add a little bit of contrast to it. Hit OK. And there we go. And I think this looks pretty cool. Obviously, this is kind of just one color. This is all pretty much the same kind of blue. And you can use other colors. You can add some other purples or some greens or something in there. If you're making it red, add some gold, some orange. But anyway, so overall, I think that that looks pretty cool. And the only thing that this is really missing is maybe some stars in the background, or maybe the actual lens flare plugin. We can go ahead and we can try using that. Let me see if I set this on screen. And if I come down here to filters, light and shadow, lens flare. This this lens flare is like huge. I don't know why this is so big. It doesn't seem to scale properly for this size image. This is way too big for what I wanted it for, so I'm not going to use that. We can try something else though. We can try filters, light and shadow. Let's add a gradient flare. And gradient flare is a really fun plugin with lots of potential. Although there's no on-canvas preview, which is kind of frustrating. So I just kind of have to guesstimate where this is supposed to be. And there's a couple different presets in here. I'm not going to go into depth on how to use this, but that'll probably look pretty good. Let's see. Maybe something like this one. I actually kind of like that one. Hit OK. And you can see that it's not positioned right because I didn't have an exact position, but it's close enough. So I can just take this and I'm just going to move it to where it needs to be. And right now it's kind of this red, so I'm just going to do a quick hue and saturation just to change that color till it fits something that's closer to blue, kind of like that. I think that looks pretty cool overall. And, you know, if you wanted to add some star fields or something in the background like I did in my other example, I'm not going to go into that because I'm going to cover creating star fields in another tutorial, so be watching for that. But yeah, so basically that is all there is to the Flame plugin. It's a really fun tool, lots of different uses, and this is just for making a background. You can take the Flame plugin and you can use it for special effects if you want to add, you know, magic uses, you know, as some sort of like swirling in the air, if you wanted to create some sort of flaming sword. There's lots of different applications for it, as long as you're willing to put in the time to play with it and see what it has to offer. But anyway, that's all for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see my future content. I'm David Wood for theblendmode.com, and I will see you guys next time.